Yo, what up, y'all? Masked Warrior back at it again with another video. I know it's been a while, guys. I had to take the week off because I had a bunch of shit to do and whatnot. But I'm back at it again and with another video. I want you to go follow my boy Drago Red on SoundCloud. Do me a favor and do that. Go follow him on SoundCloud. He has a lot more like music on there and whatnot. He does pretty good work. Work, man. Go take a look at his SoundCloud page. It's pretty cool. Anyhow, we are watching Tales from Skinwalker Ranch. Sorry. Just even hearing the word Skinwalker just gives me chills, because I am extremely afraid of skinwalkers. They are real, I know that. Ah, damn, my cigarette went out. Oh, cigar. Anyhow, let's get into the video. I'll leave a link for Drago Red's SoundCloud page in the description below. Let's get to it.
From UFOs, wormholes and cryptids, to cattle mutilations and poltergeists, a remote property in northern Utah has been described as a Disneyland.
Oh, after we get done with this series, we're gonna go back to the SCP-343 videos and head back to watching those too. I'm just trying to investigate more, or like conspiracy theory videos and whatnot. Anyhow, let's keep going.
Paranormal and supernatural phenomena, a case that has turned the heads of even some of the most ardent of skeptics. We recount the tales from Skinwalker Ranch.
Before we continue on with the video, I'm sorry for pausing so much in my videos, guys. I just want to point this out. If you want me to do like more investigations on this, on like skinwalkers and other Native American myths, just leave a comment below and like the video, you know? Let's continue. And yes, I'm recording on my phone.
It has been said that Utah, particularly northern Utah and the Uinta Basin, is one of the most active paranormal and supernatural hotspots on the planet.
Yes.
Everything from unidentified lights in the sky to weird humanoid figures and even Bigfoot have been spotted in the region.
Indeed.
It has a long history of high strangeness, accounts which date back to the earliest of human settlements.
Oh, before we get into the video, fully into the video, let me explain to you for all the people who don't know what a skinwalker is, let me tell you a quick description. A skinwalker is basically a person who is greedy for power and whatnot. They basically sell their soul to become the skinwalker. And it is really awful. It's just awful. I'm sorry, it's just awful. Well, every time I talk about anything skinwalker related, I always get the shakes, and I always get like a little shaky and whatnot. They just freaking creep me out, and I'm legitimately scared of them. So let's continue on.
3 out of every 4 people in this part of the state have experienced something out of the ordinary, and for many others just passing through, there is a palpable feeling that those dusty roads and bleak landscapes hide something of a dark secret. Much of the strange activity is concentrated in and around the basin, but some believe that within that radius there is an epicenter, from which all these bizarre phenomena seem to manifest. A beautiful 480-acre ranch situated about 100 miles due east of Salt Lake City.
Lots of portals there.
As with any other acreage, it traditionally adopts the name of the current owner, but over time, it has come to be known by another. The Utes believed this ranch to be the focal point of a curse placed on them by the Navajo. Tribe members were, and still are, forbidden from setting foot on this land, as they believe it to be in the path of the Skinwalker.
Yes.
For this reason, it became known to the locals as Skinwalker Ranch. Throughout the latter half of the 20th century, Skinwalker Ranch was owned by a family which has long remained anonymous in this mysterious saga. For reasons unknown, they suddenly and inexplicably vacated the property in 1987, leaving it empty and unattended for more than 7 years. That was until 1994, when it was purchased by Terry and Gwen Sherman. Along with their 2 children, the couple believed that they had found their dream home. The remote property was bordered to the north by a high ridge, which overlooked its sprawling green pastures, wild thickets of woodland, and its flowing creek to the south. The entire estate exuded an almost tranquil beauty that was not lost on the Sherman family. Terry was a high-end cattle breeder, and he hoped that the ranch would provide the space, privacy, and security he needed to take what was not only his hobby, but his livelihood to the next level. He had bought the ranch for an extremely favorable price, far less than what it was worth, and when he signed the paperwork, he accepted the deeds with an excited, disbelieving look in his eyes. What he now held in the palm of his hand was his ambition, his prospects, his dream. He could not have known that the land he had just purchased would almost destroy him, not just financially, but also psychologically.
Yep.
When they had first viewed the property, Terry and
Yes, the Skinwalker Ranch is extremely haunted and whatnot, and by skinwalkers and lots of other paranormal beings and whatnot. But I want to add something to this. After these people sold their property to these 2 men, and the military stepped in somehow, and they noticed that the neighbors noticed that, and some other people, that they were bringing in like troop carriers or full armed military men, and they went into the ranch and they never came out. My theory is that they were using the portals. If you don't know what the portals are, what I'm talking about, I'd suggest reading a book called Missing 411. It talks about a lot of like paranormal disappearances and whatnot. And basically these portals lead to another dimension, in my theory, you know. And yeah, it's kind of hard to explain on camera and whatnot. So if I were you, I'd read that book to get a feeling about the portals and whatnot, and kind of like understand what they are. Me, personally, I know what they are, and I know I'm taking a lot of time with this video. I know that, but I want to tell you something. The way that you can identify a portal, like out in the woods and whatnot, is you'll see something like, it kind of looks like a heat wave. You know how in the distance how heat waves will travel all along the surface of deserts and whatnot, and kind of make like a mirage look, like, you know. Well, basically, that's kind of what the portals kind of look like. If that makes any sense whatsoever. And I've seen a few portals in my lifetime. up in these woods, but there are a lot of Bigfoots where I live too, so, yeah. Anyhow, let's continue.
Gwen had found the main homestead in a state of disrepair, which of course they had anticipated, given the length of time it had stood empty. What they did not expect to find, however, was the sheer amount of deadbolts securing the home, not just on the front and back doors, but on interior doors and all of the windows too.
It's bad for you.
At the front and rear entrances, they also found heavy-duty chains attached to huge metal rungs, which were embedded into the walls. It didn't take a genius to work out that these had been used to chain large, powerful guard dogs in place. Although slightly unsettled by these peculiarities, Terry and Gwen dismissed them, believing that the elderly couple who owned the ranch before them had been paranoid and overprotective. They had seemed rather eccentric after all. In the real estate contract, they had inserted a number of unusual clauses. For instance, the Shermans were not permitted to dig on the land without prior approval from the previous owners. These irregularities were overlooked by the family, but somewhere in the back of Terry's mind, he could not help wondering what had spooked them to the point of installing this level of security. In time, of course, he would come to understand that this idyllic, stunning acreage was haunting in more ways than just its serene beauty. And in fact, the weirdness began almost straight away. On the first day of moving in, the Sherman family were unloading a truck in front of their new home when they spotted something on the far side of the pasture to the south. As it closed the distance, they could see that it was a wolf, which was loping gracefully towards them in a series of S-turns. This immediately set Terry on guard, but it wasn't just the presence of the wolf that concerned him. Scaling it against distant fence posts and bushes, he could see that this animal was at least 3 times the size of an average wolf.
That sounds suspiciously like a skinwalker. They can take form of many animals. Wolves, coyotes, heck, even birds. Or I've heard of birds, skinwalkers too. But yeah, let's continue with the video. I got a few stories to explain after this video.
But its behavior was oddly disarming. It seemed nonchalant, friendly even, rather than aggressive, slowing down and then stopping about 50 yards away. It sniffed the air and gazed at the family with intelligent, piercing blue eyes before continuing on, casually padding towards them without a care in the world. It seemed entirely tame. It wagged its tail as it approached, and Terry's father, who had been helping unload the truck, bravely reached out to stroke the huge beast.
Bad idea.
Sherman Sr. stood over 6 feet tall, and even though he was a big man, its head easily came up to the top of his shoulder. It quickly became clear that despite the wolf's intimidating size and appearance, it meant no harm. The rest of the family relaxed and walked over to greet their strange visitor. Maybe it's somebody's pet, Terry ventured, glancing nervously at the corral about 70 feet to his left, and wondering if it had been wise to move some of his herd onto the ranch so soon. Inside of the pen stood 4 of his breeding cows and as many calves. They were all clearly troubled by the wolf's presence, except for one curious youngster, which was sticking its head out between the metal bars, watching the scene unfold. Almost as soon as Terry had realized the danger, the wolf had bounded across the short distance and now had its huge jaws clamped around the calf's head. The young cow...
I want to mention that skinwalkers, believe it or not, they carry a anomalous disease that if you touch like even a body that's been bitten by a skinwalker, you will be infected by it. It is a neutral bloodborne disease that will kill you within 3 days. First, the signs of the infection will show up almost instantaneously. Yeah, and you'll start sweating first off, you start having trouble breathing, eventually you'll pass out, and if you're not careful, well, you could get infected by it, and you could die from that disease that they carry. And if you find some sort of like body that you think or you know that's been attacked by a skinwalker, be sure to stay well away from the body. Because let's just say this. You're probably going to have to use full chemical gear, like level 4 chemical gear, along with a gas mask and many other protective bodies, like protective gear and whatnot, to protect you from that disease that the skinwalker carries. I'm just saying.
Now bleated and thrashed wildly as the wolf tried to drag it out of the pen. Terry grabbed an axe handle from the back of his truck and rushed over, beating the huge animal's flanks and kicking at its hind legs. But the wolf paid no attention and refused to let go. "Get my magnum," he shouted. His son ran across to the truck, grabbed a .357 from the cabin and handed it to his father. Terry quickly fired a shot at the wolf's abdomen, which rang out across the empty pasture, but it had no effect. The huge animal did not react in any way. It did not stagger or yelp. It did not even flinch. It simply continued to ravage the poor calf.
That is definitely a skinwalker.
In his desperation, Terry fired again. Still, the gun had no effect. After a third shot, however, the wolf slowly released its grip and backed off about 10 feet. The rancher could not believe his eyes. Very few animals could have survived 3 shots from a .357 Magnum at point-blank range, but this wolf was somehow not even wounded. There was no blood anywhere on its coat. Finally, he took a 4th shot, right at the animal's heart, and it retreated another 30 feet. There was something incredibly unnerving about the way it just stood there with an unconcerned look, contemplating whether to attack the calf a second time. Terry sensed this and shouted at his son to get his .30-06 rifle from the house, which he did within a matter of seconds. The wolf remained perfectly still as he took aim with the heavier firearm, and he almost felt sorry for the poor beast. A deafening shot echoed across the wilderness as he pulled the trigger, and in that moment he knew he'd hit his target. But instead of collapsing to the ground in a heap as it should have done, the wolf simply withdrew another 2 yards and stood looking at an increasingly unsettled Terry. He quickly took another shot, and this time he saw a chunk of flesh detached from the animal, but even this did not put it down. The wolf took a last unhurried look at the calf, then turned and trotted back in the direction it came from. Terry was dumbfounded. He knew he could not allow a large predator to remain on his land if he intended to breed cattle, so he called to his teenage son, and the 2 of them proceeded to go after it. They must have followed the wolf for about half an hour, catching glimpses of it as it ran to the south between patches of cottonwoods and other trees. The tracks led them through a copse of Russian olives, the other side of which was the trail, and emerging from the trees, they found themselves on a wide-open mud bank. They could clearly see the wolf's paw prints and immediately began to follow them, but the tracks abruptly stopped about 40 yards from the water's edge. Terry and his son could not believe their eyes. They were standing in a wide-open expanse of sodden mud, yet the paw prints ended right in the middle of the bank. The wolf would have had to have leapt an impossible 40 or 50 yards in either direction to avoid leaving any more tracks. It had seemingly vanished into thin air.
It walked into a portal. It is believed that some skinwalkers have the ability to make portals into other dimensions. How is this possible? Well, I have no idea. I just know it is possible. They have some sort of mental capability in their minds. Let's continue on with the video. Just watching this.
Returning to the homestead, Terry happened to pick up the piece of flesh that had detached from the animal. He noted that, rather than being fresh and covered in blood, it looked and smelled rotten, as though it had been left out in the sun for a few days. In quiet contemplation, he turned his head south and looked out over the pasture towards the horizon, wondering what on earth had just happened. That was the first day. The next few weeks were relatively normal. except for a few strange occurrences which happened around the homestead, all targeted towards Gwen. She didn't report any of these things to her husband at first, as she genuinely thought she was losing her mind. For instance, she would come home from shopping, unpack the groceries and put them away, and then leave the room to attend to something else. Moments later, she would return to the kitchen and find the groceries all back in the bags, as if she had never unpacked them. In other occurrences, she would go to have her customary morning shower. Locking the door behind her, she would place her towel and hairbrush on the side. When she finished, she would step out of the shower only to find her towel and hairbrush missing. They would disappear. A few hours later, she would find them in some random location elsewhere in the house. Things continued like this for some time, and Gwen was getting increasingly worried about her memory. That was until Terry came in one evening, demanding to know who had taken his post digger. He had been using it to repair a fence in the pasture and had turned away for a few moments. When he turned back, it had gone. Gwen explained that she and the children had been in the house all evening and proceeded to help him search for it. However, it was nowhere to be seen. A few weeks later, it was found hanging in a tree on the other side of the ranch, 70 feet off the ground, which was odd considering that this piece of equipment weighed over 70 pounds. By this time, the Shermans were beginning to suspect that something was not quite right about the property they had bought. About a week before they rediscovered the post digger, a nephew came to stay with them, and Terry decided to take the youngster on a tour of the ranch. His son also accompanied them, and it was well after sunset when they decided to return to the homestead. A few hundred yards ahead, Terry noticed a set of headlights moving along a distant fence line, well within the boundaries of his property. He had seen these lights before and had assumed that someone had taken a wrong turn off the road to the east, but now, seeing them again, he suspected that these people, whoever they were hunting on his land without permission. He decided that he would confront them and immediately began marching in their direction. But as he picked up the pace, the lights began to move away from him. His brisk walk turned into a jog, and as the boys followed suit, he began to wonder why there was no engine sound. They had gotten to within 100 yards, when the lights suddenly lifted off the ground and floated up over some distant treetops. Terry and the boys stopped dead in their tracks, shocked by what they were seeing. The lights silently continued on their course before disappearing out of sight. During the autumn, these lights became a frequent occurrence, especially as Terry began transporting his prize Simmental and Angus cattle onto the ranch. The activity seemed to escalate with the arrival of his high-end livestock, and this is when things started to turn serious. As the winter months rolled in, severe snowstorms battered the region, and Terry found himself out at all hours, rounding up cattle that had wandered too far astray. One late evening, he was out on horseback, searching for one of his prize Angus cows that had been missing for almost 24 hours. He had covered the whole ranch, except for a dense area of woodland to the southwest, which he was now heading towards. As he approached the large outcropping of trees, he was relieved to see the unmistakable impressions of hoof prints in the deep snow, and he now knew that it was only a matter of time before he located the animal. He paused briefly as he considered the tracks. From the spacing, he determined that she had been running at full tilt as she had entered the tree line. This was odd behavior for a cow, especially during a snowstorm, unless she had been running from something. But what? Although it was unlikely for a predator to be hunting during this weather, it wasn't impossible, but he could see only one set of tracks. He followed the hoof prints for 20 yards into the trees and soon reached a wide clearing. The tracks continued out into the middle of the open space, and then stopped dead. The cow was nowhere to be seen. A cold chill ran down his spine as he recalled how the wolf's tracks had stopped in a similar fashion, as if the animal had disappeared or had been sucked up into the air. He searched for a while longer, but began to lose hope. In the end, he turned back towards the homestead with a heavy heart. The only thing Terry loved more than his cattle was his family. And to lose a single cow or bull was not only financially devastating, it was also heartbreaking.
Being that I am a little bit of a rancher, well, not a rancher, I used to raise, with my mom and dad, I used to raise, goats, and losing, like a cow or a goat, it is financially devastating, and we used to own a herd, I was, like, very young at the time. We used to own about 300 head of goats, and if we lost one of those would be, like, financially devastating and whatnot. This was, like, way back when, like, back in, God, I don't even remember what year it was, man. It's been so long. But, by the time we were done, living where we were living, we used to have a, butcher, or I can't remember the butcher's name, who used to butcher the goats for us. Russian guy. He was a nice guy and all, but he basically was like, you get your meat however you get it, and we used to sell, like, the goat meat to whomever wanted it, you know? We made good money off of it, you know? Being that I'm a former sort of farmer slash rancher or something like that, it is actually financially devastating if you lose, like, a cow, because that's like a good $2,000 or $3,000 gone, maybe even more, or if it's like a award-winning cow or something. But anyways, enough with the chit chat. Let's continue on with the video.
He had a profound sense of pride in the breeding and rearing of each of his animals. Over the course of the winter, 4 more of his prized cows and bulls would disappear in a similar fashion. Terry began to spend many nights outdoors, sticking to the shadows and creeping around his property like a spectre, trying to get the drop on who was taking his cattle. Unfortunately for him, whoever or whatever it was always seemed to be 2 steps ahead. The lights seen on his land were now commonplace, but he could only ever view them from a distance, never up close. No matter how silently he tried to creep towards them, they would simply move away as if they knew he was there.
Of course they knew it was there.
But then, in the early hours of one morning, after yet another fruitless night, he was making his way back towards the homestead, when a movement in the periphery of his vision suddenly caught his attention. To his utter shock, he saw a black mass hovering over the ground about 100 yards to his left, silhouetted against the pale white snow. Immediately he hunkered down and quietly observed the strange object as it moved across the land. To his eyes, it looked like a slightly smaller, snub-nosed version of the F-117 Nighthawk. However, he knew that it couldn't have been an F-117, because this thing was completely quiet, floating about 20 feet off the ground as if defying gravity. Coloured light shone from its hull, flitting over the snow as if it was searching for something. Terry was able to observe it for around 15 minutes as it made its way over to the west before turning back and heading east again. Sitting still in the cold, Terry's arms were beginning to go numb, and as he stretched his limbs, his joints cracked. In the deathly silence, the sound seemed impossibly loud, but in reality, it was so insignificant that it wouldn't have been heard by anyone standing beyond a distance of 6 feet. Nevertheless, the lights on the strange craft suddenly went out. It then stopped and turned in his direction. For a few tense moments, Terry's heart thumped in his...
I'll be right back, guys. I got a few things to deal with. I'll be right back. Okay, guys, sorry about that. I had to go answer a phone call real quick. And, yeah. Anyhow, let's continue on with this, video.
in his chest as the object seemed to glare at him.
We're recording.
But to his relief, it turned and silently floated off to the north out of sight. In the new year, as the spring rains began to lash the ranch, the family...
Also, I wanted to point out that some skinwalkers basically emit some sort of gamma radiation. I don't know if it's really radiation, but I know it's gamma. but it doesn't like stick to the rocks or anything like that. It was on a TV show called Skinwalker Ranch. If I were you, I would go watch that. I'm not sponsored by them or anything. I'm just saying. And so, yeah, go check them out. They're on like the History Channel and whatnot. I'm not sponsored by them or anything. I'm just saying. Okay, let's continue.
They would lose even more cattle, but now they began to reappear, sometimes dead from no apparent cause, other times extensively mutilated. The nature of these mutilations was bizarre. Huge chunks of flesh and skin were carved out of the animals, yet there was no blood. The wounds always seemed to be cut with precision instruments, displaying an almost surgical quality, rather than the savage tearing of predators.
Sounds like it sounds similar to some other areas of the world where, or some aliens. I believe that some aliens will take up cattle on their UFOs and do like surgery on them and experiment with them and whatnot. But then again, who am I to know? Oh, I'm just your regular, everyday, normal motherfucker. Alright, let's continue.
The Shermans were beginning to feel the stress caused by these losses. Throughout 1995, the strange activity only intensified. Events took place that were frankly beyond bizarre. The lights appeared over the ranch almost every night. More poltergeist activity was experienced in the homestead. Black, featureless entities began to appear, looking in through the windows, and later, even entering the house and standing at the ends of beds. Strange sounds would emanate from the ground, almost as if there was machinery or railroads operating beneath their feet. Their neighbors would hear this too. They also heard disembodied voices, speaking in strange languages coming from the sky. One morning, Terry woke to find huge, cookie-cutter-like holes dug into his land, with no resulting piles of earth anywhere to be seen. Somehow, hundreds of pounds of soil had silently been removed from his property in the dead of night. In addition to this, strange creatures were spotted walking across the land, from humanoids that resembled Bigfoot to bizarre canine-hyena hybrids with razor-sharp claws.
Canine-hyena hybrids, yep. That is definitely a Skinwalker. The Bigfoots? I'm not sure. I mean, there are some good Bigfoots out there, and there's some bad Bigfoots, but I'm not sure about these Bigfoots. But very interesting so far. Let's continue.
Would attack their livestock. There was an invisible entity that was often witnessed, not the being itself, but the effects of its presence. Livestock would part and move out of the way as if something big and unseen ran through the middle of the herd. Water in the canal would be displaced, as if large invisible feet were stomping through it. Another, smaller creature was witnessed that seemed to be shrouded in some sort of cloaking device, much like the alien entity from the movie Predator. Stationary orange lights were seen in the sky, which were different to the other ones Terry often witnessed moving in the distance. The first time he saw one of these anomalies, he was sitting out on his porch on a warm summer evening, when something suddenly appeared in the sky about a mile away from his position. He had been cleaning his rifle earlier on in the day, and a high-powered scope just happened to be nearby. He grabbed it and proceeded to view the object through the telescopic sight, and what he saw left him sitting there, mouth agape. The orange object looked like some sort of portal, and at its center, he could see an opening. On the other side of that opening was a blue sky, even though the sun had long since set. In his mind...
That is very strange. I've never heard of a portal doing that. I've seen... The portals I've seen look like mirages, like in the middle of the day, like 30 feet in front of you and whatnot, and like in the middle of the woods. I've never heard of a portal doing that. Like opening up with like a bunch of sun rays coming out of it and viewing a blue sky. That is very strange. Also, I should turn my TV off. Oh, sorry about that. Had cops on. Anyhow, let's continue.
It looked like a gateway to another place. These anomalies became a frequent occurrence above the ranch, and Terry would later describe seeing odd-shaped craft entering and exiting these openings on several other occasions. The most disturbing of all phenomena, though, were the orbs. They were not as common as the lights or portals, but when they did appear, they were far more obvious, zipping in and out of nearby trees and harassing the livestock. These were mostly about the size of a tennis ball and had a blood-red colour, but every so often, larger, blue ones would show up, and these were bad news. Nicknamed the Blue Meanies, these orbs were somehow able to instill intense fear in those who got too close to them. Perhaps it was a certain vibration or signal they gave off, which stimulated extreme anxiety. Terry and Gwen were never sure, but they feared the blue orbs more than anything else they had seen on the ranch. One evening, Terry was out on his porch again, observing the lights over his property as he often did, when he spotted an ominous blue glow coming from the tree line in front of his house. He was immediately on guard, as one of the blue orbs emerged from the thicket and slowly made its way towards him. 3 of his best hunting dogs sat by his side, and the moment they saw the orb, they began to growl and bark. Without even thinking about it, Terry set them loose, and they proceeded to chase it back into the trees. Whatever fear it was able to stimulate in human beings did not seem to affect dogs, and Terry felt his spirits lift as he considered that a small battle had been won. But then, suddenly, out of the darkness, came 3 pained yelps, and then, nothing. He waited for a couple of hours, but his dogs never returned.
Yep.
He was far too scared to venture out and look for them, but in the morning, he and his son went to search the copse of trees where he had last seen them. On the ground, they found 3 quarterized piles of flesh, smouldering in the cool morning air. This was all that was left of his dogs. This proved to be the last straw for the Sherman family. They had endured
3 smoldering corpses that look carterized. That I've never heard before at Skinwalker Ranch. Very interesting. Very, very interesting.
much more than they could physically take over the last 2 years. They were not getting any sleep. The kids were doing poorly at school. Gwen had lost her job at a bank in town, and the whole family had taken to bunking in the same room because of the strange phenomena that was now regularly entering their household during the night. On top of this, they had lost 14 head of cattle, along with family pets, and they were now on the verge of bankruptcy.
Yep. That is...
Seeing those vaporized dogs, it was now becoming clear just how much danger they were in. Terry had previously contacted a local newspaper about the strange activity taking place on his ranch, and although roundly ridiculed, the story was picked up by other publications. By chance, it caught the attention of one Robert T. Bigelow, a billionaire businessman who had recently invested a significant amount of money in setting up a scientific team whose purpose was to investigate events of high strangeness. He offered to purchase the ranch from the Shermans, who were only too happy to accept, and by July 1996, Terry and his family had vacated the property. Bigelow's team, the National Institute for Discovery Science, or NIDS, were ready to move in by September that same year, and would in fact remain at the ranch for nearly a decade, studying in detail various instances of bizarre phenomena. They would have their own stories to tell. What they encountered there was every bit as intriguing and downright terrifying as what the family had experienced. For the time being at least, whatever had been tormenting the Shermans over the last 2 years was about to receive some unwelcome attention. It was about to come face to face with a fearless, highly equipped and well-funded team of investigators who were well aware of its presence. The hunter was about to become the hunted.
And that is the end of the video. So, thoughts on this video. Basically, I'm gonna tell you guys a story about an old friend of mine, or one of my dad's old friends, and who, at an old dive bar or outside of a town. I'm not gonna say the town, of course. But anyhow, his friend used to live up in Washington, and there are skinwalkers up there. Or was it Washington? I'm pretty sure it's Washington. Anyhow, so, a couple of skinwalkers were trespassing on his land, and he sent the dog after it. 3 days later, the dog came back and was acting all strange, like it was acting very rancid. It looked like it was ragged. It looked like it was been through hell, and it was attacking his kids, or trying to. He ended up putting down the dog, and when he dragged the dog's corpse over to the side of the road, he was immediately feeling the effects of a disease, which I do not know what it's called. It has no medical, whatchamacallit whatsoever. I can't remember what it's called. But he started sweating. It started showing the side effects of the disease that the skinwalkers carry. And basically, luckily, his wife knew a medicine man. That's the only way you're gonna be able to cure a disease that from the skinwalker is if you know a real medicine man, and I know if you believe it or not. Anyhow, his wife contacted the medicine man, and the medicine man said, and get him over to my house right now and get him into my sweat lodge, which is, if you don't know what a sweat lodge is a Native American sacred, and the proper name for it is a nipi, which is Native American. Anyhow, they got him into the sweat lodge. They did what they had to do, and by the time they got him out of the sweat lodge into his truck, he was unconscious, and 3 days later, he woke up, cured from that disease, and yeah, and the guy said, and what's his name said, what was his name, the medicine man said that he needed to spend a few days on bed rest and then get up, at least move out of the country. Because you do not want to go to war with the skinwalkers. I know that. Yeah. And I'll be explaining more stories about the skinwalker occurrences that I've heard of. One including one of my family members. Believe it or not. But I hope you all enjoyed this video. Be sure to leave a like, comment, and subscribe. If you want me to do like a video on Native American traditions and whatnot, leave a like and a comment, And after part 2 of Tales from Skinwalker Ranch, I'm gonna do a video on SCP-343 or do the video on SCP-049. I don't know which one I'm gonna do next, but it is very interesting. And yeah. Anyhow, I hope you all are staying safe out there due to this COVID-19 virus. Peace and love to all of you.